a month to stop the Great Bank Conspiracy. Well, Emilie, welcome. Great to have you in the show today. And I think we should probably start with the Australian Taxpayers Alliance. Who is it? What is it?
So we're the nation's largest grassroots advocacy group representing taxpayers. And we're funded by taxpayers all across Australia who care about the same issues as we do. And we work to reduce taxes, promote common sense regulations, and end government waste.
Okay. Very, very important task then, and a big task in Australia.
Yes, for sure.
You came out heavily against the cash restriction ban and gave very strong evidence. What was the key driver behind that?
I think the biggest point here is trapping people into the banking system and giving the big four banks more power over individual consumers and small businesses. People shouldn't be forced to use bank services if they don't want to. Banks can charge higher fees if they don't have more competition. They can lower interest rates because people are forced to use their services. And this is detrimental to Australians everywhere. About 37% of Australians still use cash, and they should have a right to do so.
So essentially what we're saying is that we have a civil liberty today, and if the restriction bill passed, that would be taken away.
That is correct. And a lot of people see the 10,000 as a big number that's not going to affect them. But in many ways it will. And it will affect the banking sector because more people will be using the banks. The banks are going to be lowering those interest rates and increasing those fees. And that will hurt all Australians.
Now, one of the things that came up was the concept of debanking. In other words, people not being able to use the banking system. I think some of the other evidence that came out was that there were particular industries who had difficulty simply because of the industry that they were in.
Yes, this is actually surprised a lot of people, but we've had businesses come to us about the cash ban, concerned because they're debanked and they're not allowed to use these services, particularly vape shops. We have a campaign trying to help legalize vaping in Australia. Right now, vaping is legal, nicotine vaping is not. But because there's that association, banks go, we're stepping back, and there's some uncertainty, and they have moral qualms. And so they're just debanking people. Tattoo shops have also been debanked. Pubs have been debanked. And these are small businesses that are helping the Australian economy, and we're hurting them through this ban.
Right, so the implication there is that over time, more and more sectors of industry potentially will have it be more and more difficult for them to actually be able to run their businesses.
Exactly. And if they don't have access to cash, there's no way they can run their business.
Right. And the point you make is, I think, a really important one, John, and that is people assume that access to banking services is a universal right, and yet it's clear that some businesses don't have that right. And this cash ban would make the thing even worse.
Emilie, the other question is, and it's not something that Martin and I have talked about at length, is this issue of the $10,000 threshold being degraded because of inflation. So what I think your testimony was that the cap is basically reduced in real value by $200 a year, and then over 10 years it'll be back down to about $8,000 in real terms. So even if you have a nominal 10,000 threshold, as incomes go up because of inflation, it's kind of like bracket creep. More people will be trapped by this threshold, and the threshold is not linked to the CPI or anything like that.
It's the compounding effect, isn't it?
Exactly.
So every year the limit effectively goes lower and lower and lower, and that means that more transactions are caught. And that's independent of any initiative to drive the limit lower.
Yes, and they've already said that they're planning on taking it lower. The number 2,000 has been thrown out. And ideally, many of these organizations want it to be zero, so you couldn't use cash at all. When banks start misbehaving and when they start acting badly, whether it's charging high fees or lowering interest rates, people are going to wish they could use cash.
That's right.
Yep, and that will be taken away. So in the interest of the people, this is a very important thing to make sure that your voice is heard.
It's a key critical policy threshold for 2020.
John, Emilie, thank you very much.
Thank you.